recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm rise to speak to Bill 24, the Energy Statutes Amendment Act. I listened with interest to the Minister's remarks. I support efforts to prohibit, restrict, or regulate service for cryptocurrency mining projects in this province. I think that this is a good step for this government and this minister to take. And I agree with the minister that cryptocurrency miners consume too much electricity and provide too few jobs. And I'm going to make the case that this exact kind of effort should be extended to the LNG industry. The LNG industry also consumes large amounts of clean electricity and in exchange does not provide a commensurate number of jobs. BC's LNG industry comprises 6 projects at various stages of development, 2 under construction and currently slated to begin operations in 2025 and 2027. And LNG is a bad investment for many reasons. For one, future demand for LNG is highly uncertain. The International Energy Agency holds that there's no need for investment in new fossil fuel supply in a world that reaches net zero by 2050. Global LNG export capacity is anticipated to increase by 43% from today by the end of the decade, just as BC's export projects are planned to come online. Secondly, LNG requires huge amounts of electricity. If all 6 LNG facilities were to be built, it would require around 43 terawatt. That's so funny. I was going to make it. Terawatt hours. This is intituled in terawatt. I'm having a day. 43 terawatt hours of electricity per year. Thank you to my colleague. For context, that's 69% of BC's total 2022 demand, or the equivalent of the electricity from more than 8 Site C dams. 8 Site C dams for LNG projects alone. Just going to let that sit there for a minute, Madam Speaker. Diverting this much power to LNG would mean less power available for households or cleaner industries and on a less risky path. Thirdly, LNG would come at a cost to household affordability, jobs, and potentially ratepayers. Importing just 1 Site C's worth of electricity would cost the BC ratepayers around $600 million annually. Meanwhile, the US government anticipates that LNG exports could cause domestic natural gas prices to increase by up to 28% over the next 25 years. Building these facilities would also divert construction workers away from housing and other projects, such as expanding BC's clean electricity grid and generation at a time when this kind of labor is projected to be in short supply. It's a lot of risks, Madam Speaker. LNG is a poor choice in a climate crisis. It's far from clean, with emissions associated with every step of the supply chain, from extraction to liquefaction to combustion. If all 6 proposed LNG projects were to be built, their operational and upstream emissions alone would account for 40% of the province's 2030 emissions targets. The assumption that LNG could reduce emissions by displacing coal is highly uncertain and questioned, and with some studies suggested it could have a negative overall impact on emissions. LNG production and
I'm hoping you can bring it back to the actual bill that we're debating.
I am making the case, Madam Speaker, why this bill could apply to other industries. As it's being applied to the cryptocurrency industry, there's a strong case for this bill, these kinds of regulations to be applied to another industry that is consuming enormous, or potential of consuming enormous amounts of energy that British Columbians need for a resilient and stable and affordable energy future for the people in this province. But I will take your guidance, Madam Speaker, and just point out that BC needs to put itself on a path to a truly clean energy future, which would involve our energy production not going to industries like cryptocurrency or fracked gas industry, which is going to absorb much more of our energy and emit too many of our emissions for us to consider this a future for our province. Bill 24 also repeals Part 4 of the Clean Energy Act, which is the Standing Offer Program. Established in 2008, the Standing Offer Program was BC Hydro's primary mechanism for signing independent power projects. Most independent power projects, IPPs, were developed by or in partnership with First Nations. In March 2018, shortly after the Site C dam was approved, BC Hydro stated they would not be issuing any energy purchase agreements, effectively signaling their intention to wind down opportunities for independent power producers, many of which were First Nations. In 2019, the province suspended the Standing Offer Program. There are implications for scrapping policies like the Standing Offer Program, including a loss of trust. Many clean energy producers invested their life savings into establishing family-run green power projects. And for decades, these projects supplied electricity to remote communities and the provincial grid. A lack of vision and planning creates an uncertain investment environment for clean energy companies, and in doing so, we missed out on key skills, training, jobs, investments in clean energy, the economy of the future. Furthermore, suspending the Standing Offer Program hindered First Nations contributions to BC's clean energy economy and has stymied investment in the sector. First Nations in BC have a long history of working with IPPs to produce and sell power to BC Hydro on their territories, but there's been no opportunity to do that since the end of the Standing Offer Program. Supporting First Nations leadership in BC's renewable energy sector is critical to meeting BC's legislative commitments to reducing greenhouse emissions of 40% below 2007 levels by 2030, to support remote Indigenous communities' transition off of diesel fuel, and to advance reconciliation with Indigenous people. A 2017 survey conducted by the BC First Nation Clean Energy Working Group found that 98% of First Nation communities in BC want to participate in the renewable energy sector. There's interest and capacity, but unfortunately, this government stymied this momentum and shut a door during a crucial window of time, at the same time as opening the door to Site C, something that in 2017 they ran on suggesting that they would not do. We support the call for power, and we look forward to the diversification of energy procurement and production in the province. We need more wind and solar. We're happy to see that this call requires a minimum of 25% equity ownership by First Nations, whose territories facilities would be located in. This call for power requires a minimum of 40 megawatts, which is a huge investment and a good opportunity if First Nations have projects that size in their territory. But what about smaller projects? It's unlikely the Indigenous Clean Energy Initiative, with only $140 million invested by the province, will go far enough in supporting the small-scale, Indigenous-owned clean energy projects we desperately need. I've heard from Indigenous leaders that they want the Standing Offer Program to remain suspended rather than eliminated so that it could be reactivated if need be. Local renewable energy projects developed by First Nations are preferable to purchasing electricity from the US, but unfortunately, that is what we seem to be doing. Last year, BC Hydro imported 20% of the province's electricity. This government predicts a 15% increase in electricity demand by 2030, and BC Hydro expects a shift from surplus to a deficit of power by 2030, even with the addition of Site C power in 2025. Perhaps. Premier Eby admitted that BC Hydro's slow-motion approvals process is a major obstacle to the province developing the power it needs in the short to medium term. But we also must consider our long-term energy needs, power generation, and infrastructure requirements for various industries. Ultimately, the future of our energy supply is a crucial consideration. It affects all of us on a daily basis. What lies ahead for our energy future? What should it look like? These are questions that demand careful consideration, and the province needs to ensure British Columbians that history won't be repeated. We can't afford to invest in a new clean energy policy landscape just to have it scrapped again. The public, companies, and investors need certainty. I think too, and I'll just end, the minister talked about drought at the end of her comments, and I think that we are seeing a significantly transformed landscape already due to climate change. We are seeing impacts of drought all over this province. And I think that it behooves the minister and the government and the ministry to really consider a clean energy future that isn't overly reliant on dams, that isn't overly reliant on seeing hydropower as the way forward because of the conditions of drought that we're seeing. But I'll just come back to where I started, which is our clean energy should not be going to fuel dirty energy. This makes no sense in 2024. That if we're generating clean energy in this province, the last thing we should be doing with it is building transmission lines to LNG facilities so that they can create dirty energy, which then they export out of BC, generating mostly profits for the multinational companies that are owning those LNG plants. And I would really hope to see a better vision for the future of energy, and in particular, clean energy in this province. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, member.